This morning, this afternoon, I am opening a hearing on cybersecurity. We are going to examine the efforts to protect the American people from cyber threats, to protect our domains of .mil, .gov, and .com. We need to make sure that the American people know what our programs are, know what we're spending our money for, and also to make sure that we make wise use of taxpayer dollars so that there are no techno boondoggles. We hope to make sure we know how to help the private sector and to protect .com by real-time information sharing about threats and helping the private sector to develop the secure technologies we need. We need to prevent hackers, nation states, and criminals from stealing our identities, cyber espionage, cyber sabotage against our online commerce or our critical infrastructure, track and disrupt the hackers, and prosecute them when possible. I have two goals for this hearing. First, I'm going to make sure that we protect the American people from cyber threats by working together across the government to protect, as I said, the domains of .mil, .gov, and .com. Second, I want to examine how agencies will use cybersecurity funding in the budget. The administration is requesting over $13 billion for fiscal 2014. In this very stringent environment, we are concerned about techno boondoggles. The government is often very good at spending money, but we need to make sure we spend the money well. Over the years, there have been failures and inefficiencies in government IT programs, and we don't want to happen as we move forward in this cyber domain. I call this hearing as the full committee chairwoman to work across the subcommittees to make sure there aren't stovepipes, to make sure as we look at this, the questions that we have related to governance, are we developing the right technologies to protect us? Are we investing in the workforce we need? And how do we protect our civil liberties? I am so proud of my subcommittee chairs. I want to acknowledge the work of Senator Durbin and the ranking member Cochran on defense. I want to acknowledge the work of Chairwoman Landrieu, her ranking member, Senator Coates, both with a great deal of expertise. For me, we will have the FBI and NIST, and my great vice chairman, Senator Shelby. This is a committee that is loaded with talent in this area, coming with enormous expertise from the authorizing committee. We have Senator Leahy from the Judiciary Committee, well-versed on the issues of law on cybersecurity and a staunch protector of our civil liberties. We have Chairwoman Feinstein on the Intelligence Committee. From Armed Services, we have Reed, Shaheen, Graham, and Blunt. We have the former chair of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Collins, herself now a member of the Intel Committee. Rarely has a committee had so much talent coming together from both those of us from appropriations as well as the authorizers. I hope that our country has a sense of urgency. We are already under attack. This is the new enduring war. We are in a cyber war every day. Every time someone steals our identity, steals our state secrets or our trade secrets, we are at war. We now see the growing nexus between cyber criminals and nation states, hacking our networks, planning disruptions of our business operations. Director Mueller of the FBI said that cybercrime will eventually surpass terrorism as our #1 threat to America. Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey continue to warn us against cyber as an insidious threat. These are such critical concern that the President Obama, in his recent meeting with the Chinese president, raised cybersecurity as one of our great international tensions between both countries. Now, last year, we tried to pass cybersecurity legislation. We all worked on a bipartisan basis. It was actually under the Collins-Lieberman bill. But it didn't happen. The president's issued an executive order. But just because authorizing hasn't happened doesn't mean that nothing is happening. So in February, the President signed his executive order, and it improves real-time information sharing, protects critical infrastructure, provides critical infrastructure and cyber risk, and brings private sector experts into the federal service. Each one of these goes through a different subcommittee, but here today, we're going to do something pretty different. And I bring to your attention the President's fiscal 14 budget on the areas of cybersecurity. This will be the first time in one place that we can look across all of the areas to make sure we know what the request is, what they are, not only in individual agencies, but do we get the synergistic effect necessary to protect our country. It is significant that this document that you all have, which is a public document, that we have in one place, one-stop shop, really what the President is requesting. The President of the United States, in his budget message to Congress, has asked for $13 billion in order to execute the cybersecurity strategy across the agencies of the federal government. The purpose of this hearing today is to look at the cybersecurity threat. Not every program from the National Security Agency, not every program being run by Homeland or the Department of Justice or the great work being done by NIST. It is to focus on the cybersecurity. But it is a committee first, and I might say a Senate first. No other committee has tried to hold a hearing across the different domains, agencies, and smokestacks, and also to do it in an open, public way. And the expertise, as I said here, from both the subcommittee chairs and the authorizing is stunning. So we know that we're going to be able to do it. The President has asked for $13 billion, $9.3 billion in the Department of Defense, $1.3 billion in Homeland Security, $670 million in Justice, primarily the FBI, and NIST $215 million. NIST has never seen $215 billion. That's the defense guys. Today we'll hear from our government's lead people in this, General Alexander, the director of the National Security Agency and the head of Cyber Command, Rand Beers, the acting deputy secretary of Homeland Security, Dr. Gallagher, the acting deputy secretary of Commerce, but the director of NIST, and Richard McFeely, the FBI executive assistant director in charge of criminal, cyber, and response and service branch. I also want to acknowledge that in the last several days, many intelligence issues have been in the press. In my CJS, and I understand that these are issues that are very much on the public's mind and members of the Senate. Last week, in my Commerce Justice hearing, with the Attorney General, this topic, particularly our surveillance program, came up. I pledged to Senator Shelby, a former chair of the Intelligence Committee, well-versed on the topic, not of the surveillance, but on this, that we would have a full committee hearing on that particular program. That's not today. That's for another day. I understand that our colleague, Senator Feinstein, the chair of the Intelligence Committee, has scheduled a briefing for all senators tomorrow. And Senator, this is the second hearing that Senator Feinstein has opened up the Intelligence Committee for a briefing for all senators to be able to participate. After the Feinstein meeting tomorrow, if Senator Shelby continues to recommend that this committee hold a hearing on this matter, I will be happy to comply. And I pledge that to you, sir. I did it last week and so on. But we'll see if it's necessary. And if deemed so, we certainly will. So again, today's hearing will focus on cyber threat, protecting the American people, protecting the taxpayer in their role as both citizen and taxpayer. I hope today's hearings will focus on this very important issue. And I say to my colleagues, this is a committee hearing that is a first. It will be not the last on this topic or other matters related to our national security. I now want to turn to my ranking member, Senator Shelby, who has been active on this matter, the vice chairman of the committee, former chair of the Intelligence Committee. Senator Shelby.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you've pointed out, this is a very important hearing on a topic that demands significant congressional involvement. The cyber threat, as we all know, is increasing and becoming more challenging as our adversaries grow bolder and more capable. We've seen recent and stark reminders of the threat with constant cyber attacks on the financial sector, the Chinese hacking of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, Iranian attacks against the Saudi oil company, and reports that information on our most advanced weapon systems were stolen by the Chinese. Earlier this year, an information security company publicly reported that Chinese attackers are running an extensive cyber espionage campaign with the likely support of the Chinese government. More recently, the same company exposed Iranian hacking in the U.S. These troubling developments remind us of how urgently we need a coordinated effort to counter and to respond to these attacks. Madam Chair, this committee may be the only one with jurisdiction over the full complement of government organizations involved in cybersecurity. Therefore, as you pointed out, I think it's appropriate that we take a lead role in the oversight of this effort, working with others. I would like to hear, for example, how each of you today perceive the threat and about your continuing efforts to protect critical infrastructure against attack and to address the cyber threat outside the recently issued executive order. Cybersecurity is an immediate priority, but the framework envisioned in the executive order will take time to develop and probably even longer to implement. There are still areas that need more attention and may require legislation, such as information sharing. Additionally, the working relationship between the government and the private sector is still a work in progress. Funding requirements also remain unclear in this time of fiscal uncertainty. Clearly, a lot needs to be done. I look forward today from hearing from our panel of witnesses, and perhaps they can suggest some of the best way to protect government systems and information as you partner with industry to strengthen our cyber infrastructure across the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Now we'll turn to our witness panel, and then we'll go to questions, starting with myself and Senator Shelby, and then the regular order that we follow in the order of arrival. I'd like to suggest that General Alexander go first, followed by Mr. Beers, Mr. McFeely representing Justice, and Dr. Gallagher, you're the wrap-up guy. General Alexander, the microphone is yours.
Senator, thank you very much. I think what you and Senator Shelby have pointed out with respect to cyberspace is absolutely important for us to discuss. The threats that we face today continue to grow. You know, it takes, for the government, a team to work this. So before I go any further, I do want to point out that the team is here, and it's great to be part of that team because no one government department or agency can do it itself. For us, it's going to take the partnership between Homeland Security, between the FBI, and with the support of NIST, and especially on the executive order that Senator Shelby brought up, for us to work together. You know, when I look at what's going on in cyberspace and the capabilities that are growing, this is an incredible opportunity for us as a nation and for nations around the world. The technical capabilities that we have when you look at what our children are using, the iPhones, the iPads, the ability for education, this is a tremendous time. When we look at what we can do with this with respect to medical care in the future, it is a bright future for us. But it's complicated by the fact of cyber espionage, by cyber hacking, and the threats that Senator Shelby talked about. So I do want to hit on that. You mentioned the evolution of this threat. And when you look at the threat as it has gone forward, some of the things that FBI and we see in the Department of Homeland Security work every day is a series of exploitations into our networks. The issue is, how do you fix that? And that issue is complicated by the fact that it's not only exploitations that are going on, but we're seeing disruptive attacks against our nation's infrastructure, Wall Street, with the potential for destructive attacks. We as a nation need to step forward and say, how are we going to work this? The government team that is here today cannot do it without support from industry. We have to have some way of working with industry because they own and operate the bulk of our nation's infrastructure. And we have to do it in a transparent way, in a legal way, and we really appreciate the efforts of many on this panel, Senator, for what you and others have done to try to move that legislation along. But we do need to get there. We do need to have a way of working with industry. And Dr. Gallagher, I know we'll talk about parts of this. We couldn't have a better person to lead it from NIST. So thanks for what you and the team are doing. We do need to begin that dialogue with industry. So part of what the executive order does is give us that opportunity to have that dialogue. At the same time, we have to look at what we need in legislation and get that moving forward. So, Senator, thanks for what you and the Intel Committee are doing to move that and others. From my perspective, Senator, you asked, what is it that we need to do? I think there are 5 key things that we're working on. First, we have to create a defensible architecture. Both the intelligence community and the Defense Department are moving forward on what we call the cloud architecture, a joint joint information environment for the Defense Department and the Intel community's IT environment. Same thing for both communities, moving forward to what is a more defensible architecture. And I think we need to move there. So that's the first thing. Second, we need to be able to see what's going on in cyberspace so that we can work with industry and amongst ourselves. Because getting information after an attack only allows us to police it up. We have to have some way of stopping it while it's going on, so we need to be able to see it. We need a concept for operating in cyberspace, not just within the Defense Department, but amongst all 3 of us, because we all have a role in this, and we all play vital roles. From the Department of Homeland Security's role for recovery and working with commercial industry to the FBI's law enforcement and investigative things to the Defense Department's responsibility to defend the nation. We have to bring those together and then reach out to say, now how is that going to work with industry? And how can we share information that is vital to our common defense? We have to do that. We need trained and ready forces. I think that is one of the most important things that Congress expects of me, of Cyber Command, and of NSA to, within the department, to create trained and ready forces that are trained to a higher standard, both on the defense and on the offense, those capabilities that our nation needs that are trained to that standard, that know how to operate lawfully, to protect American civil liberties and privacy, and to protect this nation in cyberspace. We have to be able to do all 3. And we have to have a capacity to act when authorized, the rules of engagement and the other authorities. We're working those 5. From my perspective, the men and women of Cyber Command and NSA, we have tremendous technical talent. We really do. And these are great people. Our nation has invested a lot in these people. They do this lawfully. They take compliance oversight, protecting civil liberties and privacy and the security of this nation to their heart every day. I could not be more proud of the men and women of NSA and Cyber Command. What we now need to do is take the next step in moving that forward. That's all I have at this time, Senator. I'll defer now to my colleague, Mr. Beers.
Thank you, General Alexander. Chairwoman Mikulski, Ranking Member Shelby, and other distinguished members of the committee. We all welcome this opportunity to appear before you. As you said, Senator Mikulski, this is a unique opportunity to talk about the range of cybersecurity activities across the government, and we welcome that. As most of you know, cybersecurity is one of the 5 major missions of the Department of Homeland Security, and one that we take very seriously. The threats that we face are varied and serious, and in that regard, our mission focuses in 2 primary areas. They are to protect the federal civilian networks and to work with the private sector to protect America's critical infrastructure. In that regard, and as the Chairwoman mentioned, the President's policy initiatives for the year ahead are to secure federal networks, to protect critical infrastructure, to improve incident response, to engage internationally, and to shape the future. With respect to the first, this is one of the major areas that DHS is responsible for. We are investing about $600 million in protecting federal networks through our intrusion protection systems and through our continuous diagnostics and mitigation systems. We are also working heavily with America's critical infrastructure, both public and private. We're working under the executive order with our partners in NIST to create the cybersecurity framework, and this is, as you know, an important initiative on our part. The executive order, as you know, is the administration's effort after an attempt to get legislation last year. That isn't to say that we still aren't interested in getting that legislation, and that's certainly something that we want to talk about in the time ahead. In addition to that, we're working to improve incident response, working with our partners in the FBI and with the National Security Agency. This is a call to one, call to all initiative in which we work together both in our headquarters and our operations center in terms of sharing information and where we work together in the field in the deployment of teams to go to particular sites of particular incidents in order to determine what happened and in order to be able to provide information to other parts of the private sector that will help them prevent the same kind of an incident from occurring. We're also involved in the international area with individual countries and partners around the world, but also with the European Union as well. While it is a small program within the Department of Homeland Security, it is a very important program, and we have a lot of key partners that we work with. And that's just in terms of the engagement, in terms of face-to-face, in terms of the information sharing, our whole incident response structure. The National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center on a regular basis shares information internationally with other computer emergency readiness teams around the world in order to do with them what we do for ourselves nationally in order to protect cyberspace around the world. And finally, we work in terms of our research and development and other activities to try to shape the future. This is an important effort that's ongoing, one in which, as General Alexander said, we couldn't do if we were doing it individually in DHS. It takes all of us here at the table to make this work, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and to talk about DHS programs and our teamwork together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, Vice Chairman Shelby, and members of the committee. It's difficult to overstate the potential impact cyber threats pose to our economy, our national security, and the critical infrastructure upon which our country relies. That's why the FBI, along with our key partners sitting at the table here, are strengthening our cyber capabilities in the same way we enhanced our intelligence and national security capabilities in the wake of 9/11. I want to talk briefly about what the FBI's response been, but I echo both of these two gentlemen's comments that this is a whole-of-government approach when it comes to addressing this issue. In the last year, within the FBI, we have undergone a paradigm shift in how we conduct cyber operations. While we previously watched, collected information, and added to our understanding of the adversary's intentions, we did not always take action by seeking to disrupt them as we might in a counterterrorism case. We are now working with our partners, successfully disrupting and impacting the individuals behind the keyboard who have made it their mission to attack, steal, spy, and commit terrorist acts against our nation and its citizens. Instead of watching foreign countries steal our intellectual property, we're going out to companies and trying to prevent it. For example, working with DHS, we now routinely provide private industry and our law enforcement partners overseas with IP addresses that are responsible for launching attacks against our country. Just last week, the FBI, Microsoft, and the financial services industry conducted separate but coordinated operations to successfully disrupt more than 1,000 botnets, networks of compromised computers that had been infected with a malware known as Citadel. The botnets were part of a massive global cybercrime operation estimated to be responsible for more than $500 million in financial fraud. These actions are part of a larger U.S. government strategy led by the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, or NCI-JTF, to target botnet creators and distributors. They exemplify how the FBI and our partners are using private-public partnerships, both domestically and internationally, to protect the public from cyber criminals. At the NCI-JTF, which serves as the deconfliction center on cyber threat investigations, among 19 U.S. and 2 international agencies, the government is coordinating its efforts at an unprecedented level. This coordination involves senior personnel at key agencies. While it is led by the FBI, it now has deputy directors from the National Security Agency, DHS, CIA, the U.S. Secret Service, and U.S. Cyber Command. We must recognize that to work together, we have to make sure that we keep pace and surpass the capabilities of our cyber adversaries. As General Alexander described earlier, the leaders of the FBI, DHS, and NSA met last fall and clarified the lanes in the road to cyber jurisdiction. And I believe that the collective opinion among the worker levels is that there is now an unprecedented level of cooperation not seen since the immediate post-9/11 era. In addition to strengthening our partnerships in government, we have significantly enhanced our collaboration with the private sector. As part of that outreach, we have begun to provide industry partners with classified threat briefings and other information and tools to help repel intruders. Among these tools is a new platform we are developing for trusted industry partners to report cyber incidents to all of government in real time. Known as iGuardian, it is based on the successful Guardian terrorist threat tracking and collaboration system developed after 9/11. We are also developing an automated malware analysis tool to which law enforcement and industry partners could submit samples of malware for triage and analysis. We expect an unclassified version of this system to be piloted with the private sector this fall. And while we have been primarily focused on cyber intrusions, which we see as the greatest cyber threat to our national security, we are working with our state and local law enforcement partners to identify and address gaps in the investigation and prosecution of Internet fraud crimes. The FBI, the U.S. Secret Service, should not bear all responsibility for this. We believe that there is a huge space for our state and local partners to join us in this fight. To address these gaps, we have developed a pilot program in collaboration with the International Chiefs of Police and other law enforcement organizations to enhance the Internet fraud targeting packages that the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, currently provides to state and local law enforcement for investigation and potential prosecution. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and look forward to answering questions.
Dr. Gallagher.
Great, thank you. Chairwoman Mikulski and Vice Chairman Shelby, members of the committee, it's a distinct pleasure to be here today to join my colleagues to talk to you about cybersecurity. Since I'm batting cleanup, I want to touch quickly on just 2 topics. First is the all-of-government approach. Good teamwork is based on playing your position, and the NIST position is based on our mission. We are a measurement science and standards organization, and our role is to support industry the owners and operators of this infrastructure as they respond to the information that they get from our intelligence community, from our law enforcement community, and from Homeland Security. This is a top priority for NIST. In our 2014 budget request, there's a $24 million increase to cybersecurity R&D programs at NIST. This is on top of our making our total investment of $68 million. This funding enables our R&D performance in a number of critical areas, including the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, an interagency effort, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and implementation of Executive Order 13636, improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Secondly, I'd like to give you a quick update on the executive order. As many of you know, under the order, NIST has been directed to work with industry to develop a framework of cybersecurity practices, methods, and so forth that supports the performance goals established by the Department of Homeland Security. For this to be successful, two major elements have to be part of the approach. First is an effective partnership between the agencies, and that is occurring. In fact, we memorialized this with a memorandum of understanding between DHS and NIST, and with close working collaborations with my colleagues here. And secondly, the cybersecurity framework must be developed through a process that is industry-led, open and transparent to all of the stakeholders. Because it is by having industry develop their own practices that are responsive to the performance goals that we end up with an output that is technically robust because it draws on their expertise and is aligned with business interest and practice. This is not a new or novel approach for NIST. We have utilized a similar approach in the recent past to address other national priorities, including smart grid and cloud computing. Madam Chair, I appreciate the challenge before us. The executive order is very aggressive in the timing for the framework process. It is to be developed within 1 year. The first draft is due in 120 days. Today marks the halfway point in that process. We have issued, in support of this effort, a request for information and have gathered input from industry and other stakeholders. We have held the first 2 of 4 planned workshops to support this process, and we will use these workshops to finalize and develop the framework because it's this type of approach that allows us the appropriate level of collaboration and engagement with industry. In May, we released the initial findings and the early analysis from the request for information. That release marks the transition from sort of gathering facts to actually building the framework. At 8 months, we will have an initial draft of the framework, including an initial list of standards, guidelines, and practices. And then following that, we will work with our agency partners to finalize the framework. But even after the framework is done, the work is really only just beginning. Adoption and use of the framework is going to raise new issues to address. The goal at the end of this process is for industry to adopt the framework themselves, so it becomes an ongoing process that enhances cybersecurity. The President's executive order lays out an urgent and ambitious agenda, but it is designed around an active collaboration between the public and private sectors, and I wholeheartedly believe that partnership is the essential ingredient for its success. In short, the cybersecurity challenge, both in the .gov and in the .com domain, is greater than it has ever been. Active collaboration among the private sector and between the public and private sectors is really the only way we can meet this challenge, leveraging both sides' roles, responsibilities, and capabilities. And we have a lot of work, and I look forward to working with this committee to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gallagher, and all who, all 4 witnesses. Today, the way we'll function is we'll follow the 5-minute rule. We'll go in order of arrival. We also know that this hearing does not preclude the subcommittees from also continuing their own hearings where they will even probe more deeply. And also, after we have concluded all of our questioning, we will also understand that there will be certain aspects in order to drill down. We will also have an additional classified forum this afternoon in the classified section in the Visitor Center. But now we'll be in full and open session, not precluding further hearings by the subcommittees. General Alexander, well, to all, just to reiterate the President's budget. The President has requested $9.2 billion for defense, $1.2 billion, almost $1.3 billion for Homeland Security. For all of justice, including FBI, $589 million, $215 million for commerce, primarily in NIST. The National Science Foundation, $197 million, GSA, $50 million, Department of State, $37 million. When one hears $13 billion, that is a lot of money. However, we are in an enduring war where our citizens are under attack from identity theft to state secrets, trade secrets, business secrets, etc. So, but our question today is, $13 billion adequate in the various areas? And number one, and number two, when we spend the $13 billion, will we also avoid the kind of things where sometimes we throw money at a new problem? Sometimes and often we have what I call techno boondoggles. We've seen it at the FBI in the past. We've seen it at Homeland Security in the past. We've seen it at DOD. So this is what we're doing. But let's go right to the President's request and the purpose. As I understand from the administration's priorities, the administration's priority, and if you look at his budget statement to us, secure the federal networks, lead by example and make sure our networks are safe and secure, protect critical infrastructure, improve incident response, engage internationally. Number three, shape the future. General Alexander, you will be getting, if we pass this budget, where the request is for $9 billion. I understand that 3.5 will be to protect the DOD network. We understand that. But what will you use the other 5.8 to do, and how will we get security for that dollar and avoid the problems of the past?
Well, thanks, Senator. It is a lot of money, and I can tell you that from our perspective, what we're talking about here is not just protecting our networks, but developing the forces that we need. So part of that money goes for training and outfitting the teams that Cyber Command and our components need. Part of that money goes for the information assurance and fixing the networks. You hit on part of that, and developing future architectures. So when I look at this, from my perspective, I believe this is right, the right amount. I know the administration and the Defense Department has already looked internal to this budget to see where we can take cuts, and we did. We cut it back to what we thought was the minimum that we could use and still do this job. You pointed out, Senator, that for the Defense Department, our job is to protect the nation and our networks. And building up the infrastructure that we need, both within DOD and amongst the services and Cyber Command, that's where that $5.8 billion goes. So it's split across all those. It doesn't go to one lump. It helps each of the services, DISA and Cyber Command, do their missions. $2.17 billion, as you pointed out, and others, goes to NSA for doing their job and is part of the Intel community's budget. So that's rolled in there as well. $582 million goes to U.S. Cyber Command, and that's for 5 key areas: leases for teams, setting up the teams, training our teams, starting the military construction, have a place to house these teams, for our headquarters, and for research development, training, another $68 million. So I think it is the right number. I think we have looked at where we could take savings and have done that. I also think it's important to state that the department sees this as an area to help ensure the nation is ready as we look at the rest of our force posture. This is going to be key to our future. That's all I have, Senator.
Let me just a follow-on question. In your testimony, this goes to protecting critical infrastructure. An obsession, I think, of this committee, and something we concentrated on very keenly when we were working on authorizing legislation under Lieberman Collins, or Collins Lieberman, or now Collins and a lot of us. But in your testimony, sir, you say from 0 to 10, in our capacity to defend our critical infrastructure, you rate us at a 3. A 3. a 3 to protect our grid, a 3 to protect our financial services. And my question then is, of the money that you're getting, I understand Homeland Security is supposed to protect us against domestic threats. Where do you come in, and where does Homeland Security come in? And is part of your money also used to do the services to support them?
Well, we do work together, but our monies, they are not overlapping in this case, as you point out. Specifically, the Defense Department has 2 sets of roles and responsibilities here. One, to build, operate, and defend the DoD networks. That's the one responsibility, and that's a big cost because that's our forces global. And that's the biggest bulk of the money that's here. The second part is to develop the teams to defend the nation from a cyber attack, and that's where we come in. Now, we work with DHS, we work with FBI in setting up the op centers and funding and supporting those op centers so that we can communicate amongst us. But DHS has that responsibility to work with industry to set the standards, to work recovery in that part. FBI has the responsibility to do law enforcement investigation. We have the responsibility on the NSA side for the foreign intelligence and to defend against an attack. So what we're doing is developing the capabilities and the teams. We're still going to need legislation to do those operations.
Well, I could have follow-up, but I'm going to turn to Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Gallagher, I'll address my first question to you. Could you explain, since NIST has been tasked under the executive order with developing a framework to reduce cyber risk to critical infrastructure, could you explain how the NIST process will work, how the development of a framework to reduce cyber risk differs from the development of standards to reduce such risk, and what do you believe will compel private industry, which I think is so important, to implement the framework that is developed? And given the evolution of technology that you very much into, all of you, generally, and cyber threats specifically, now, how useful is the development of a broad-based generic framework long-term? Will NIST just be chasing its tail, so to speak, or will you be able to get ahead of the curve? I'd be interested for you to share your thoughts here, how the framework and the standards and so forth will apply, or could apply.
Well, thank you very much.
I know that's a mouthful.
I'm going to do my best. The idea behind the framework is very simply to get industry to develop a set of practices, standards, methodologies, whatever it would take that, if implemented, would improve cybersecurity performance. So we used the term framework as a term of art to refer to whatever you would put into place that would result in enhanced cybersecurity performance. That will include a large measure of standards. And the idea behind having industry do it, with NIST acting as a technical supporting role and a convener, has a couple of motivations. First of all, it addresses the capacity. Industry is the one developing IT technology and communication technology, and therefore they know where this technology is going, and they can bring that skill and that expertise into the process to develop these standards. Secondly, these companies, the internet is a global infrastructure, and these companies operate at a global scale. And by embedding security performance into the products and services themselves, we can in fact achieve a cybersecurity performance that's much broader than our borders, much broader than what we would buy directly. It embeds it in the market and in fact gives our companies the power to shape those technologies around the world. In terms of chasing our tail, I think in a time when this technology is moving so quickly and when the threat environment is changing right in front of us, this is going to be an ongoing challenge. But I think the bottleneck can't be NIST. We are simply not large enough to support this on our own. Our role really has to be viewed as, did we help industry come up with a vehicle where they can organize and be responsive to this? That's the only way sufficient technical capacity can be brought to bear, in my view.
And let me pick up on that if I could. The executive order, as I understand it, discusses the development of a broad framework which presumably, I would think, means it will be generic in order to have broad applicability to all critical infrastructure sectors. But how will, Doctor, a generic framework address the inherent differences in our critical infrastructure and their unique needs for being protected against cyber attacks? In other words, if we're not addressing sector-specific needs, how can we be sure that we're actually helping protect any of these industries from a cyber attack? And lastly, in this same vein, how do you bring industry on board? Because they have systems, trade secrets, formulas, everything, you name it, to protect. And the government would have to protect those and should. How will that work?
So you're exactly right, and I think that the challenge, the question you asked about, industry's capacity to come together and carry this out is actually the central question. How generic and how sector-specific this framework looks is, in fact, the exact question that the participants in the framework are tackling. The good news is that in spite of the strong differences across sectors, looking at energy or agriculture or transportation and so forth, they are dependent on a core set of communication and IT technologies. And one of the big advantages they have to working together to set a common platform is that they can drive that performance into the market, and they can buy these computer services and IT equipment at better cost because they're helping to shape the entire market. And that really gets to one of the questions you raised earlier, which is how do you drive adoption of this framework? I think the bottom line is doing good cybersecurity has to become good business. In the end, this is all going to be about alignment. These framework practices have to be compatible with profitable and well-run companies. And that's really, it may very well turn out that the framework discussions are more about management and business practices than they are about technical controls. And that's okay if it helps us achieve the level of performance we're looking for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like most Vermonters, I've had a lot of concern about Section 215 of the Patriot Act, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance, the FISA. We've had a number of common sense proposals in the Judiciary Committee to improve these provisions, but the intelligence community has told us that really we obviously don't have the ability as simple senators to know anything as well as you do, and so they do not need changes. I've been told they're critical to our counterterrorism efforts. Congress shouldn't tinker with them at all. We should simply trust you to use them the right way, and they shouldn't be made permanent. I don't think that's wise. I think that there should be sunset provisions, and we should look at them periodically, and we should actually debate them in a free and open society. Now, we have information recently declassified by the Director of National Intelligence, and I'm not going into questions of whether he completely contradicted himself in a couple of answers, but taking what he's recently declassified, it appears that Section 702 collection said it was critical to disrupting the Zazi case in New York City. But it's not clear the data collected pursuant to Section 215 of the Patriot Act was similarly critical or crucial. So, General Alexander, let me ask you, aside from these two cases, has the intelligence community kept track of how many times phone records obtained through Section 215 of the Patriot Act were critical to the discovery and disruption of terrorist threats?
I don't have those figures today.
Are those figures available?
We are going to make those figures available.
How
We
soon?
promised, over the next week, it would be our intent to get those figures out. I've talked to the Intel Committee on that yesterday. I think it's important to
No,
note
wait a
that
minute. You talked to the Intel community about this yesterday, but you didn't have the figures yesterday.
I gave an approximate number to them in a
Okay, what's your
classified, but it's dozens of terrorist events that these have helped prevent.
Okay,
From
so
my
dozens.
perspective,
Now, we collect millions and millions and millions of records through 215, but dozens of them have proved crucial, or critical, in your
Yeah,
words. Is that right? Dozens?
For both here and abroad, in disrupting or contributing to the disruption
Out
of
of
terrorist
those,
attacks.
out of those millions, dozens have been critical.
That's correct.
Would you get me the specific, even if it has to be classified, the specific cases you're talking about?
We will, but we're going through the Intel Committee to do this. Tomorrow, I'll give as clear as we have vetted precisely what we've done on each of those. And the reason that I want to get this exactly right, Senator, is I want the American people to know that we're being transparent in here.
Well, no,
and that we're
no,
being
no,
exactly
you're not giving it to the American people. You're giving it a classified to specific members of Congress. Is that correct?
Well, there's two parts. We can give the classified, that's easy. But I think also for this debate, what you were asking, and perhaps I misunderstood this, but I thought you were also asking what we could put out unclassified. And so the intent would be to do both.
Okay.
As you said that, I
You
agree.
can do that within a week?
That is our intent. I am pushing for that and perhaps faster. And if I don't get any kicks behind me.
If you don't get any what?
Kicks from the people behind me who are doing the work, because we do want to get this right. And it has to be vetted across the community so that what we give you, you know, is accurate. And we have everybody here, especially between the FBI and the rest of the intel community, can say, this is exactly correct.
Okay, now, DNI Clapper said that Section 702 collection was critical to the discovery and disruption of the plot to bomb the New York City subway system, Zazi case. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, not just critical, it was the one that developed the lead on it.
Thank you.
So I would say it was the one that allowed us to know it was happening.
But that is different than Section 215.
That is different than Section 215.
15 phone records, 702.
So if I could explain this.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I do think it's important that we get this right. And I want the American people to know that we're trying to be transparent here, protect civil liberties and privacy, but also the security of this country. On the New York City one, the Zazi case, it started with a 702 set of information based on operatives overseas. We saw connections into a person in Colorado. That was passed to the FBI. The FBI determined who that was, Zazi, and phone numbers that went to that. The phone numbers on Zazi were the things that then allowed us to use the business records, FISA, to go and find out connections from Zazi to other players throughout the community, specifically in New York City.
So
that's how those two work
215
together.
critical.
I think 215 is critical in corroborating and in helping us
Was it
understand.
critical in Zazi?
Not to Zazi, because the first part to Zazi went to the 702.
And Headley? Was either 702 or 215 critical?
702 on Headley and some on the business record FISA for corroborating.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it's important to understand because this is a issue that I think will be part of the debate. And I would put on there, Senator, also the Boston. I think we need to walk through that so that what we have on the business record FISA, what we have on 702, what you debate, the facts that we can give you is what we do with that, how we tip that to the FBI. If we took that away, what we could not do, and is that something that when we look at this from a security perspective?
Of course,
is
in
good?
Boston, if you're talking about the Marathon case, what the FBI could have done was to have passed on the information to the Boston authorities. They said they did not. That might have been helpful too. But my time is up, and I mention this only because before it's brought up in the Judiciary Committee, we're going to be asking some very, very specific.
So if I could, Senator, I just want to make sure that we're clear on one point. When I say dozens, what I'm talking about here is that these authorities complement each other in helping us identify different terrorist actions and help disrupt them. They complement each other. So what you're asking me is to state unequivocally that A or B contributed solely to that. The reality is they work together, and we've got to help make that clear to you, so in the debate we have that.
And I'll be waiting to see those specific examples, either in open or classified fashion.
Okay.
Senator Cochran.
Madam Chair, thank you. Let me first ask General Alexander, in testimony that was received by the Armed Services Committee, there was a discussion about how to provide incentives to talented military personnel who might be interested in the cybersecurity field to become involved. I know it's hard to contemplate how to just wave a magic wand and have all of the talented people available in the right places with the right responsibilities. What do you see as a first step in trying to get an infrastructure of leadership organized appropriately to carry out these missions?
Senator, thanks. I think the most important part, top to bottom, is the training. Coming up with a clear training program, which we have done with the services and with NSA, to develop a set of standards. I think the training in and of itself helps us build a great cyber force. And it's that training for the leaders, so we have training at the staff officer level, at the team level, all the way down to the individual operator. And we're standardizing that training amongst the services and between NSA and Cyber Command. I think raising those standards up has a couple of benefits. The soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians that come into this field get great training. And it's something that they look forward to. And the operations that they do are significant. I think they really feel good about what they're able to do for our country. So from my perspective, it starts with training and building that kind of a force. You mentioned incentives, Senator, if I could. I think incentives is going to play a key part in this. As incentive pay for languages plays a key part, I think incentives for our cyber force is also going to play a key part. And we've had discussions with the services about how to start that. We don't have that in this program yet, but that's something that we're looking at.
There's also a question about whether or not the Department of Defense has the resources to maintain a number of cyber test ranges across its services and agencies. Again, in the training phase, there have to be exercises with conventional weapons and other weapons systems. Could you share with the committee what your thoughts are about cyber ranges so that you will have an opportunity to dedicate certain areas exclusively for these purposes?
Senator, that's a great question, and one that we're putting a lot of effort into, because I do think we need to bring the ranges together so that we have a joint approach to this. One of the things that I would point out is the service academies play a cyber defense exercise together. And this gets into your range issue in that when you look at, so how do you defend your networks in a way? The service academies compete against each other for seeing who has the most defensible network. When you think about that, in a cyber range, what you want people to do is to practice their tactics, techniques, and procedures in a sterile environment so nothing bad happens. It only happens inside that they can learn. We've seen that in the military side. The National Training Center and other things are great places for that. We need to do the same here. So those that are defending our networks know what the adversaries are going to do and are prepared for all those contingencies. It helps raise that. And I think bringing the ranges together ensures that they're operating at the right level as a joint team.
My staff informed me that last week we received a notice, our committee received a notice that about half of NSA's personnel in the Cyber Threat Center could be furloughed as a result of sequestration. Now, that's a fine how do you do, welcome aboard. Has there been any attention given to what you're going to do? Somebody jumps up and says, we've been sequestered, your funds have been sequestered.
So we've worked this, it's across the Defense Department. So the sequestration for all the military has been standardized across all the departments. The NSA on the intel side is not there, but all of Cyber Command, our civilians, will be sequestered. Right now, that is an 11-day or 1 day a week for the last 11 days of the year. That has a significant impact on us and all others that will be furloughed. I think that is a key issue and has significant impact on our people. And it goes right back to how do you hire good people and then furlough them? This is a tough issue that not only we face, but the rest of the department.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cochran, and thank you for raising the sequester issue. It has been raised at the Intel hearing when we listened to the worldwide threat, right as we were moving into the continuing funding resolution. D&I Clapper asked for more flexibility. Of course, he wanted more money, but more flexibility. We were precluded by the House from putting that in the bill. I think the Intel community, which is primarily, particularly at DOD, a civilian force, you need that flexibility. So we look forward to working on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the dome to be able to do this. I just would like to share with the committee the order. We're going to go to Durbin, then Johans, Merkley, Collins, Tom Udall, Senator Coates, Senator Landrieu, and Senator Feinstein, you came before the testimony started, so instead of alternating, we'll go right to you, then we'll go to Senator Bozeman, and then Senator Pryor. That's our order of our lineup. So now it's going to be Durbin, Johans, Merkley, Collins. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks as well to Senator Mikulski for bringing the cyber issue into sharp focus for the entire Senate with our bipartisan briefing. I was on the Intelligence Committee right at the time of 9/11. I saw what happened immediately afterwards. There was a dramatic investment in intelligence resources for our nation to keep us safe, and a dramatic investment in the personnel to execute the plan to keep us safe. I trusted, and I still do, that we were hiring the very best, trusting them to not only give us their best in terms of knowledge, but also their loyalty to our country. I'd like to ask you about one of those employees who is now in a Hong Kong hotel. And what we know about him is as follows. He was a high school dropout. He was a community college dropout. He had a GED degree. He was injured in training for the U.S. Army and had to leave as a result of that. And he took a job as a security guard for the NSA in Maryland. Shortly thereafter, he took a job for the CIA in what is characterized as IT security in the Guardian piece that was published. At age 23, he was stationed in an undercover manner overseas for the CIA and was given clearance and access to a wide array of classified documents. At age 25, he went to work for a private contractor and most recently worked for Booz Allen, another private contractor, working for our government. I'm trying to look at this resume in background. It says he ended up earning somewhere between $122,000 and $200,000 a year. I'm trying to look at the resume background for this individual who had access to this highly classified information at such a young age with a limited educational and work experience, part of it as a security guard, and ask you if you're troubled that he was given that kind of opportunity to be so close to important information that was critical to the security of our nation.
I do have concerns about that over the process, Senator. I have grave concerns over that. The access that he had, the process that we did, and those are things that I have to look into and fix from my end, and that across the Intel community, Director Clapper said we're going to look across that as well. I think those absolutely need to be looked at. I would point out that in the IT arena, in the cyber arena, some of these folks have tremendous skills to operate networks. That was his job for the most part from the 2009-10 is an IT, a system administrator within those networks. He had great skills in that area. But the rest of it, you've hit on the head. We do have to go back and look at these processes, the oversight in those. We have those, where they went wrong, and how we fix those.
Let me shift to another topic raised by Senator Leahy, Section 215. 10 years ago, I first introduced legislation known as the SAFE Act. It was a bipartisan bill to reform the Patriot Act. My co-sponsors included Senators Chuck Hagel, John Kerry, and Barack Obama. My most significant concern with 215 was that it would be used to obtain sensitive personal information of innocent Americans who had no connection to any suspected terrorism or spy activity. When the Patriot Act was up for reauthorization in 2005, I worked to establish a new standard for 215, and under this standard, the FBI would have broad authority to obtain any information even tangentially connected to a suspected terrorist or spy, such as the examples used in the Zazi case. 702 information could have led to 215 phone record information on any suspect. But under my provision, innocent Americans with no connection to any of these activities or suspects would be protected. The Republican-controlled Senate approved my reform to 215 unanimously. However, the Bush administration objected. It was removed in the conference committee. 2009, I tried again with no success to put this protection of innocent Americans back into the Patriot Act. Now that the cloak has been lifted by media reports that the NSA obtained phone records of millions of innocent Americans with no connection to terrorism. The data includes the numbers of both parties to the calls, the location of the callers, the time and duration of the calls. I've been briefed on these programs, and I obviously won't discuss their details here, but it appears to me the government could obtain the useful information we need to stay safe and still protect innocent Americans. My question to you is this. Section 215 can be used to obtain, quote, any tangible thing, close quote. That could include medical records, internet search records, tax records, credit card records. Last year, the government filed 212 Section 215 orders. That's an increase from 21 such orders in 2009. So clearly this authority is being used for something more than phone records. So let me ask you, do you think Section 215, giving you authority to secure tangible things, could include the categories of information that I just listed?
I don't use those, so I'm not aware of anything that goes that would be outside of NSA. All we use this for today is the business records FISA. I would point out, and just want to characterize something that you said here. As you know, this was developed, and I agree with you, we all had this concern coming out of 9/11. How are we going to protect the nation? Because we did get intercepts on Midar, but we didn't know where he was. We didn't have the data collected to know that he was a bad person. And because he was in the United States, the way we treat it is he's a U.S. person. So we had no information on that. And if we didn't collect that ahead of time, we couldn't make those connections. So what we create is a set of data, and we put it out here. And then only under specific times can we query that data. And as you know, Senator, every time we do that, it's auditable by the committees, by the Justice Department, by the court, and by the administration. We get oversight from everybody on this.
I'm over my time, but here's the point. If you knew that a suspect had made a call into area code 312, the city of Chicago, it certainly defies logic that you need to collect all of the telephone calls made in the 312 area code on the chance that one of those persons might be on the other end of the phone. Now, if you have a suspected contact, that to me is clear. I want you to go after that person.
Right.
What I'm concerned about is the reach beyond that affects innocent people.
So we agree at least on that part. And the next step, and I think in the debate that we actually need to talk about, is so what happens if you don't know he's in 312 yet? And so something happens, and now we say, who was he talking to? So let's take Midar. You had authorized us to get Midar's phones in California. But MIDAR was talking to the other 4 teams. Under the business record FISA, because we had stored that data in a database, we now have what we call reasonable articulable suspicion. We could take that number and go backwards in time and see who he was talking to. And if we saw there were 4 other groups, we wouldn't know who those people were. We'd only get the numbers. We'd say, this looks of interest, and pass that to the FBI. We don't look at the identities of it. We only look at the connections.
I'm way over time. I'm not going to dwell on it. You've just given a clear illustration where you had specific information about telephone contacts, which I don't quarrel with. What I quarrel with is collecting all of the information in California on telephone records to try to find that specific case. That, to me, seems overly broad.
Thank you very much. Senator Johans?
General Alexander, I want to talk to you about Cyber Command, but Senator Durbin has raised a very interesting question. And let me just follow up on this. Would this lead, the scenario that he has laid out, would it lead to a telephone record search for all of Omaha, or walk us through that?
So the methodology would be, let's put into a secure environment called detail records. These are to from records. And at a selected time, so we don't know anything that's in there, we won't search that unless we have some reasonable articulable suspicion about terrorist-related organizations. If we see that, we have to prove that we have that. Then given that, we can now look and say, who was this guy talking to in the United States and why?
And so you could search across the breadth of telephone records?
No, all you're looking for on that is, so who did he talk to?
Yeah.
So the system just gives us back who he was talking to. But if you didn't collect it, how do you know who he was talking to? And so the issue really becomes, if you don't have the information, so I don't give you any connections, I just give you a number and say, now find who he's talking to, you don't have the information. And so as you see, the issue is, so this was the debate, I mean, you bring it up because this came up 10 years ago. So how do we do that? How do we solve this problem? And the answer was, we want to protect civil liberties and privacy. We do. And we want to protect the country. So the thought was a reasonable approach that we all agreed on, Congress, the courts, the administration, was, we'll put this in a way that we have tremendous oversight by the court. And so every time your people, a small set of those, can go in, they have to have a reason to go in and look at the data. And when they get something out, they have to look at it and say, does this meet a reporting guidelines, and put that report. Only a few reports a year go out on that, just a handfuls.
Does this extend beyond telephone records? For example, could you check and see what that person is Googling? Could you check and see who that person is emailing?
So there's two parts of your question here. So going to the next step, once we identify a person of interest, then it goes to the FBI. The FBI will then look at that and say, what more do we need to now look at that individual themselves? So there are issues and things that they would then look at if passed to them.
So the answer to the question is yes.
Yes, you could. I mean, you can get a court order to do that. So in either case,
But would that take a court order?
it would. To do any kind of search in these areas on a U.S. person, you have to have a court order.
So now you've gotten into phone records. You've gotten into who they might be Googling. You've gotten into who they might be emailing. What else do you feel that you can get?
So I'm not sure of your question. On a terrorist acting in the United States,
Well, you don't know if it's a terrorist yet. You've got this reasonable suspicion, which isn't even probable cause. You've just got this kind of uneasy notion, this feeling that something is happening here.
so that's the,
Wait. But let's just stop here a minute. We're not going to inhibit your questions. But I think we need to clarify that the activity in which you're operating, General Alexander, so we're getting to probable cause. A lot of these that are absolutely important in a debate. And Senator, I will want you to, but you will be functioning also with a warrant. Senator Feinstein, did you want to clarify, just if we could, and I'm going to come
If
back
I
and give you
may,
more time.
if-
Senator Johans,
if
you
I
will get
may-
more time.
Thank you.
If I may, quickly, Senator, it's my understanding you have the metadata, you have the records of what appears on a phone bill. And if you want to go to the content, then you have to get a court order, the same thing you would do in a criminal case. You'd have to get a court order that would permit you to collect the content of the call. You can ask him if that's right or wrong.
That's correct. But, I mean,
And I assume that, but I'm not talking about content at this point. I'm not asking if you can read somebody's emails. I'm assuming at some point there would be a legal standard by which you could do that. Being a lawyer, I know that. What I'm only getting to is you've identified for us that you can get phone contacts. I'm asking, can you get Google contacts? Can you get email contacts? I'm not talking about reading the email or seeing what they're saying back and forth. I'm not at that point. But what I worry about is how far do you believe this authority extends? Can you get Google contacts? Can you get email contacts? And again, I'm not asking about reading the email.
so I think there's a couple things here that I want to make sure that we've got. The BR FISA only talks about phone contact, phone metadata. That's all that program talks about. So any program that we have, and Senator Feinstein, if you want to get the content, you'd have to get a court order. In any of these programs, you know we have court orders for doing that, with oversight by Congress, by the courts, and by the administration. So my concern in all of this is that I think this is an area where we have to give you both the detail, and I think we need this for the American people. They need to understand it so they can see what we're doing and what the results of it are. I do think that's important. I also believe, you know, we had this debate several times, and Senator Durbin brought it up, from 2001 on. And this is one now where we need to bring out, because of these leaks, the rest of the story, show what we do, what it protects the country from, and have the debate. Does it make sense? And so that's part, in order to do that, I think what we have to give you is the rest of that data. Tomorrow, we'll put that in a classified session, but the intent would be to try to get as much out public so that everybody has the information where we can. And the reason that I hesitate a little bit here is I don't want to make a mistake that causes the statements that I have for our country to lose some form of protection, and we get hit with a terrorist attack because I made that mistake.
Yeah, and I thank the chair for the additional time, and I'll wrap up with a comment. The concern here, the American public is fearful that in this massive amount of data you get, that there's the ability of the federal government to synthesize that data and learn something more than maybe what was ever contemplated by the Patriot Act. That would be number one. The second thing is a more personal issue, and it kind of gets into some of the concerns about Cyber Command, and that is you're in this hugely unique role. We've always had this view of separating the civilian leadership, politically elected, from the military leadership. And yet you've got this dual hat. And it creates a concern, not about you, because you've got a remarkable record, and I thank you for your service, but it is a very, very concerning role that we find you in, at least for Mike Johans. And I just think we've got to get some information out to the public, because right now we're all getting bombarded with questions that many of us at the rank and file level in the Senate cannot answer. I am not the chair of the Intelligence Committee. I'm not the ranking member. I don't serve on the committee. And the impression has been created that people parked in our office giving us daily briefings on this or monthly briefings, and that's not been the case.
Well,
So we need to know.
Senator Johans, I think you had an excellent line of questioning, and I must say the tone and demeanor are appreciated.
Thank you.
So can I-
And General Alexander, we are going to move on from this topic. I think you have that. I think Senator Merkley has been waiting. What we're now moving into is a domain that is not the parameters of this hearing, though this senator will not inhibit any senator from asking any question they want. I want to remind the senators that tomorrow in the Feinstein hearing, many of these can be followed, and I hope it's a learning experience that when you go to Feinstein, your questions will even be, as cogent and comprehensive as they are here today. So Senator Merkley, we're going to turn to you now.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, General. And you referred to Section 215, and 215 requires for an application for production of any tangible thing. And it says in it that this application must have a statement of facts showing reasonable grounds that the tangible things sought are relevant to an authorized investigation. So we have several standards of law embedded in this application: a statement of facts, reasonable grounds, tangible things that are relevant to an authorized investigation. Now, as it's been described in this conversation and in the press, the standard for collecting phone records on Americans is now all phone records, all the time, all across America. How do we get from the reasonable grounds, relevant, authorized investigation, statement of facts, to all phone records, all the time, all locations? How do you make that transition, and how has the standard of the law been met?
Well, so this is what we have to deal with the court, and I think that we go through this court process. It's a very deliberate process where we meet all of those portions of the 215. We lay out for the court what we're going to do, and to meet that portion that you just said, the answer is we don't get to look at the data. We don't get to swim through the data unless
Let me stop you there, because these are requirements to acquire the data, not to analyze the data, to acquire the data. This is the application, acquire the data. So here I have my Verizon phone, my cell phone. What authorized investigation gave you the grounds for acquiring my cell phone data?
I want to make sure I get this exactly right. I think on the legal standards and stuff, on this part here, I think we need to get Department of Justice and others, because it is a complex area. And you're asking a specific question. I don't want to shirk that, but I want to make sure I get it exactly right. And so I do think what we should do as part of perhaps the closed hearing tomorrow, walk through that with the intent of taking what you've asked and seeing if we can get it declassified and out to the American people so they see exactly how we do it, because I do think that should be answered.
General, thank you, and let me fill in the middle piece here. In between
Senator
these-
Merkley, I'd like to help you out. I think Senator Merkley has asked an excellent question, and you want to get it right. And the answer, I would suggest, should be in writing. That way you get it right, and he gets his answer. How does that sound?
But we'll take that for the record.
I've asked that question get answered tomorrow at the hearing by Justice, Senator Merkley, exactly as you have delivered the question.
Okay?
I hope
But either way, Senator Merkley should get his answer. And I would suggest perhaps both in writing, your hearing, and into his hands.
I thank the chair, both chairs. And if I can elaborate on the piece that I would like answered, is that okay, Madam Chair? Okay, thank you.
It's your time.
In between these two pieces, FISA court gives an interpretation of the plain language of the law. Their interpretation is what translates the standards in the law into what is governable in terms of what you can do. I had an amendment last December that said these findings of law that translate the requirements that are in the law into what is permissible needs to be declassified so we can have the debate. I believe that what you just said is you want that information to be declassified that explains how you get from these standards of law to the conduct that has now been presented publicly. Did I catch that right? And do you support the standards of law, the interpretation of the FISA court of the plain language to be set before the American people so we can have this debate?
I think that makes sense. I'm not the only decision maker in the administration on this process. So there are two issues. I'm not equivocating. I just want to make sure that I put this expectation exactly right. And that is, I don't want to jeopardize the security of Americans by making a mistake and saying, yes, we're going to do all that. But the intent is to get the transparency there. So, Senator, I will work hard to do that. And if I can't do that, I will come back to you and tell you why, and then we should have that discussion and run it out. And I defer to the chair of the Intel Committee, but I think that's reasonable to get this out. Now, having said that, I don't have the legal background that perhaps you have in this area. I want this debate out there for a couple reasons. I think what we're doing to protect American citizens here is the right thing. Our agency takes great pride in protecting this nation and our civil liberties and privacy, and doing it in partnership with this committee, with this Congress, and with the courts. We have everybody there. We aren't trying to hide it. We're trying to protect America. So we need your help in doing that. This isn't something that's just NSA or the administration doing on its own. This is what that our nation expects our government to do for us. So we ought to have that debate. We ought to put it out there, and we've got to put those two together. So I just want to put that one caveat there. And if I can get it, if I can make it happen, I will.
General, I thank you for your expression of support. And I also want to thank Chair Feinstein, who helped develop and send a letter expressing this concern about this secrecy of the interpretations of the FISA court. I do think it's time that become understandable in public, because otherwise, how in a democracy do you have a debate if you don't know what the plain language means? I do have concerns about that translation, and I'll continue this conversation, and thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I'm actually going to ask a question about computer security, but before I do so, I do want to give General Alexander a chance to answer a very quick question that has to do with Americans' concern about their own private computer security and privacy. I saw an interview in which Mr. Snowden claimed that due to his position at NSA, he could tap into virtually any American's phone calls or emails. True or false?
False. I know of no way to do that.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because perhaps that's one issue we could put to rest. Now let me switch to the computer security question.
Oh, boy.
In the president's budget, it is mentioned that the nation has 4 top cyber risks. And the first one listed is one that's been of great concern to me since we produced the bill last year that unfortunately could not get past a filibuster, and that is attacks that are aimed at our critical infrastructure. And Secretary Beers, I'm going to ask you this question. The General has alluded to the fact that much of our critical infrastructure is owned or operated by the private sector. In fact, it's 85% that's in the private sector. And our FBI witness has talked about the iGuardian program, which encourages private industry partners to report cyber incidents to the government in real time. Our legislation last year had a requirement that the owners and operators of critical infrastructure, not all infrastructure, critical infrastructure, would be required to report major cybersecurity incidences. Does the administration still support mandatory reporting in such cases?
Senator, that was our position then. That remains our position at this point in time. Obviously, we're prepared to work with the Congress. You all ultimately write the legislation, but that remains the administration's position.
Thank you. In that legislation, we did pay attention to the need for a more expert cyber workforce. And boy, this latest account, which Senator Durbin did such a great job of going through the resume of this individual, just underscores how much work there is to be done in making sure that whether it's public sector or private sector, that we have a well-vetted, well-qualified cyber workforce. I would like to hear from all four of you on whether you are having difficulties in recruiting individuals who have the skills that you need and doing the appropriate vetting of them so that we can avoid having the hiring of a young high school dropout, community college dropout, didn't complete his military service, young person with so little experience being given access to so much classified information. And General Alexander, we'll start with you and then just go down the panel.
Well, Senator, I'd just like to state first that in the military, we are going to hire young folks out of high school, who graduate from high school, to work in this area. And the key will be the training that we give them. Now, ideally, we'd like to get 4 years out of a top-notch engineering school for some of the military positions, but we won't get that. So what we have is a responsibility to train them, bring them into the force and train them. And we have a program, but it takes several years to get somebody trained in this area, as you know. So in effect, what we're running is a cyber college for many of our young enlisted folks to get them to the requisite skills. On the NSA side, we're able to hire more college graduates into the government side of that. What I need, I think, is greater scrutiny. What I need to go back and look at is what am I getting with my contract support and what are their capabilities and how do we manage that from a government perspective. So that's something I have concerns about and I've got to go back and address.
Secretary Beers.
Senator, we have a major initiative underway, as you're well aware. We've defined our cyber workforce. We are matching the positions with the skill set that is required to serve in those positions. We are also in the process of looking to hire another 600 individuals to augment that 1,500 person workforce. We have a series of programs, one with community colleges, where we're looking to find people who have taken the correct appropriate courses at the community college level, who we can hire as beginning workforce members and train them up. We also have a program in conjunction with NSA that goes to colleges and universities that have centers for excellence that provide us with top-notch four-year graduates. And then we have an effort to reach out to the private sector to find individuals there. This is, I think we have an excellent workforce, but we have, as you well know, a provision that was in the bill that you worked on.
Correct.
And that we would like to see in any cyber legislation that gives us some assistance in terms of both recruiting and retaining that kind of a workforce, which would allow us comparable pay and benefits to what NSA is able to offer to its workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. I know my time has expired, so I'm going to ask the other two witnesses to submit their answers for the record, but I think the whole workforce issue is absolutely critical. We did have that as an important part of our bill last year. Thank you, Madam
I think you're absolutely right, Senator Collins, and thank you for asking a question actually on the topic, though it is our security. And we're going to turn now to Senator Udall, but just to add to that as we go to Senator Udall, we keep hearing Snowden had the skills, so, well, maybe he did. You know, but just because you're a swimmer and a champion swimmer doesn't mean we ought to make you a Navy SEAL. So I'll leave it at that. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the entire panel for their service to the country in these very difficult times. And first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Pat Gallagher. Although his career took him away from Albuquerque, Dr. Gallagher is a native of New Mexico, and I want to recognize him for his leadership at NIST and his commitment to public service. Pat, it's good to have you here today. American citizens, businesses, and government agencies face serious cyber threats, and you've talked about some of these here today. Personal data, trade secrets, and national security secrets are at risk from intrusion by independent hackers and foreign governments. And I've supported cybersecurity legislation in the Senate, and I support funding for our cybersecurity defense. But the elephant in the room today here is, and we've been talking about it some, is that many Americans are also becoming more concerned about what their own government is doing with domestic surveillance. Last week, we learned of widespread collection of Americans' phone records under Section 215 of the Patriot Act, also the massive scale online surveillance through the PRISM system conducted under FISA Section 702. I want to let you know I voted against the Patriot Act in 2001 and the FISA Amendment Act in 2008. I've also voted against their reauthorizations. Since then, several of us attempted to add privacy protections to these laws, but faced strong resistance, as Senator Durbin indicated. Today, I'm sending a bipartisan letter to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board asking them to make it a priority to investigate the bulk phone records collection and the PRISM program to determine whether they, number one, are conducted within the statutory authority granted by Congress, and number two, take the necessary precautions to protect the privacy and civil liberties of American citizens under the Constitution. The board was created by Congress based on a recommendation of the 9/11 Commission, but it has taken years, many of you realize this and know this, years to get a full membership and a chairman. I've been working to get this board operational since I was in the House, and I believe it can provide an important check against civil liberties abuses. Richard Clark, who was the counterterrorism aide under 3 presidents, I believe, just wrote an article recently on this and suggested we wouldn't have the problems today if we had stood up this board much more quickly. General Alexander, will the NSA cooperate with any investigation conducted by the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board into the agency's collection and analysis programs?
Senator, we will, and I think, in fact, we met, or my deputy met with the board yesterday and actually briefed them for a couple of hours on both programs so that they understood. And I think, I don't know if you've gotten feedback from that, but from my understanding is I think it went well. I think you bring up a very important point here because I do think what we're doing does protect American civil liberties and privacy. The issue is, to date, we've not been able to explain it because it's classified. So that issue is something that we're wrestling with. How do we explain this and still keep this nation secure? That's the issue that we have in front of us. And so, You know that this was something that was debated vigorously in Congress, both the House and the Senate, within the administration, and now works for the court. So when you look at this, this is not us doing something under the covers. This is what we're doing on behalf of all of us for the good of this country. Now, what we need to do, I think, is to bring as many facts as we can out to the American people. So I agree with you, but I just want to make that clear, because from the perspective is that we're trying to hide something because we did something wrong. We're not. We want to tell you what we're doing and tell you that it's right and let the American people see this. I think that's important, but I don't want to jeopardize the security of our country or our allies. So that's what we have to weigh in what we look at what we're going to declassify to allow this very public debate.
General, I very much appreciate your answer, but it's very, very difficult, I think, to have a transparent debate about secret programs approved by a secret court issuing secret court orders based on secret interpretations of the law. Now, I'm going to ask, I know there are many other questions here, and I'm going to ask the ones in closed session when we get together later in the week. I have several other questions on cybersecurity, but I see my time has expired, and so I will submit those for the record. But thank you very much for your answers, and I very much appreciate you meeting with the board and briefing them on what you're doing. I think that they're a good counterbalance in terms of what's going on here, in terms of asking questions and then being able to I hope, have the credibility of the American people to answer some of these questions also. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're now going to turn to Senator Coates, but before we do, I want to respond to a tweet about me from Rosie Gray. Rosie Gray said on her tweet 17 minutes ago, Senator Barb is trying hard to keep the other senators from asking General Alexander any more about data mining programs. Not everybody might be watching C-SPAN, so I want to say to Rosie and to others who might read it from Rosie, there is no attempt here to muzzle, stifle any senator from asking any kind of question. And so we have an open hearing. The purpose of the hearing was on the enduring war of cybersecurity. While we might be concerned about data mining and who's reading the phone records, et cetera, we're also concerned about stealing the cyber fraud that's going on against our senior citizens, our identity theft, stealing our cures for cancer that are pending over at FDA. So we're here on cyber, but any senator can ask any question at this hearing that they want to. So Rosie, it's an open hearing. Hi, look forward to keeping in touch. Senator Coates?
Well, I want to send a message to Rosie also as a member of the other party. Senator Mikulski, chairman of this committee, has been extremely tolerant of our diversion from what the purpose of this appropriations hearing was. This is the Appropriations Committee. Our purpose is to determine what kind of resources, financial resources, our agencies need to address critical issues facing our country. And we've diverted, thanks to the tolerance of the chair, to a critical question, but one that, as General Alexander said, is scheduled to be and will be thoroughly discussed with every member of Congress and with the public to the extent that that's possible. General, I appreciate your answer to Senator Udall's question, the last question. You're walking a very difficult tightrope here because there are demands that you release previously classified information to not just members of Congress, but to the general public. And if you don't do that, this frenzy of mischaracterization of these programs will continue in the public. And so you're caught between a rock and a hard place. I regret that. I've been urging my colleagues that before they draw a conclusion, and go public with that conclusion, they learn about the program. Because the more you learn about the program, the more you realize the enormous effort that has been made to respect the privacy and civil liberties of Americans, and the hurdles you have to go through to get the most minimalist of information. I think as the public learns more about what is happening here, you know, we say all the phone records all the time, and the public interprets that as meaning everything that has been said over a phone is stored somewhere, and you can go in and retrieve it, or there can be abuse of that. You've tried to clarify that a number of different times in terms of what you collect and what you don't collect, and how you have to go through a legal process in order to even begin to ascertain information that is necessary for you to come to some conclusion about whether or not this country is about to be attacked by terrorists. And so I just, well, let me ask you this question. Given the fact that this issue has swept across the country, and we're in a position where we have to disclose more about it in order to calm the public misperception of what it is, are there consequences? Do we have to look at both sides of this question? One, being transparent, addressing civil liberties, but two, the importance of keeping some missions and some activities in a classified manner so that those that are intending to do us harm don't learn about this and therefore make adjustments to bypass the very methods that we have to potentially prevent a serious attack against the United States. I'd like you to address that question, particularly in relationship to what you said about 911 and what perhaps we had these programs in place at the time, we could have prevented that, and a little bit more about the consequences of our simply, as some have suggested, open this up for the whole world. And the whole world means a lot of people sitting in places where they're trying to determine how they can best attack the United States.
Senator, thank you for the question, because that is my concern. Great harm has already been done by opening this up, and the consequence, I believe, is our security is jeopardized. There is no doubt in my mind that we will lose capabilities as a result of this, and that not only the United States, but those allies that we have helped will no longer be as safe as they were 2 weeks ago. So I am really concerned about that. I'm also concerned that as we go forward, we now know that some of this has been released. So what does it make sense to explain to the American people so they have confidence that their government is doing the right thing? Because I believe we are, and we have to show them that. And you said it right. We have great people working under extremely difficult conditions to ensure the security of this nation and protect our civil liberties and privacy. They do a great job. Actually, I would like the American people to know that, because they would be tremendously proud of the men and women of NSA who have done this for us for the last decade. It is a great story. The issue is that we then have to debate is how much do we give out, and what does that do to our future security? That's where the real debate is going to take place, because that's the issue that is now before us. There is water, broken glass, and everything else on the floor. We now can look at that, but what we're going to have to do as a nation going forward is saying, what can we do? And that's where Congress, I believe, has to stand up on behalf of the American people. Some of these are still going to be classified and should be, because if we tell the terrorists every way that we're going to track them, they will get through, and Americans will die. That's wrong. And our allies. We've got to come up with a way of doing this. And you know, I thought the great part about this program was that we brought Congress, the administration, and the courts all together. We did that. That's what our government stands for, under the same Constitution. We follow that Constitution. We swear an oath to it. So I am concerned, and I think we have to balance that. I will not. I would rather take a public meeting and people think I'm hiding something than to jeopardize the security of this country. Now, having said that, some of this is out there, and it is right that we have that debate. And so what makes sense to put out there so that people will know that what we're doing is right, we ought to do that. And I think that that part will be good for the country. And there's other parts that I think you need to weigh in and say, but don't do that. And that's where you, the administration, and potentially the courts ought to come together and say, so now what do we do?
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that statement, and I think it should be made in the record and published across the nation.
Senator Landrieu.
Thank you so much. I'd like to follow up by saying, General Alexander, I'm so proud of you for being in charge of this, because your demeanor through this whole hearing has once again proven to me that you're the right person for this job, and the 4 stars that you wear indicate a great understanding of the balance that you're trying to achieve. Perhaps these facts might support what Senator Coates and others have been trying to express, given the difficult, important but difficult questioning. U.S. Cyber Command says there are 250,000 attacks on U.S. government networks every hour, 6 million a day. And among the attackers are 140 foreign spy organizations. This is what our men and women are up against. We are not in a scrimmage. We are in a war. It's a very serious issue. And we are way behind the 8 ball, in my view, in terms of allocation of resources, as much as we're struggling to clarify roles and responsibilities and balance this new war that we've never fought before under a Constitution that's probably the best and most open in the world. I think they need a little space. Secondly, I have every confidence in this chairman to provide leadership. This hearing is one of the best hearings, Madam Chair, I've ever participated in the almost 18 years I've been here. I thank you for it. And I have great confidence in Senator Feinstein, who I don't think there's a member of the Senate on either party that would question her integrity on this issue as head of our Intelligence Committee, trying to balance the civil liberties representing the state of California, which probably has the strongest views on this on any state, and the military, which has been engaged in war since the beginning of time, but never one like this. So I just want to say I am very proud of our military and very proud of you, General Alexander, and I hope that in the classified hearing that more of this can be brought to light, and I most certainly am going to be explaining this to my constituents in an appropriate, balanced way. But I want to say one other thing to you, Mr. Beers. Your staff is terrific. They briefed me privately yesterday on several briefings. I want to share this and then ask a question. When I asked them to sort of describe the scope of cybersecurity and the challenge before us, they said, well, Senator, somebody's described it like this. They said the Department of Defense is .mil. It's the Coke bottle cap, if you think about a Coke bottle. It's just the cap of the Coke bottle. The federal civilian government, which is .gov, is like the Coke bottle itself. And the companies and citizens, which is .com, is the entire room the bottle is in. So while all the questions are being peppered right now to the top of this Coke bottle, Madam Chair, the room that we're in is the battleground that we're fighting in. And it takes huge resources and an unbelievable amount of commitment and compromise between the government and the private sector. So what I want to ask the Secretary of Homeland, since that's, and I'm very proud to be the chair of the committee, when the President issued his executive order on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, it requires not only you, Mr. Secretary, but Commerce, Treasury is not here, to come up with a report. That report is actually due today. It's 120 days from it. Do you have the report? Can you comment about, if you don't have it, when you're going to have it, and 1 or 2 of the top findings in that report that you're going to be giving to Congress, I hope, sometime soon?
Senator, yes, the report is done. The report has been sent to OMB. in the White House. I trust that Commerce and Treasury have also submitted their report on incentives. It will be subjected by OMB to an interagency process, and at the end of the process, the expectation is to release it to you all in the private sector for comment. What we want out of this is to pull together, and we've had workshops to talk about incentives. We had one, last week in Pittsburgh, to draw in the private sector to give us their ideas about incentives to have critical infrastructure adopt the cybersecurity framework. That report will cover such things as insurance as a possibility. It will cover such things as certification with some liability protections as a possibility. These are all still ideas that are in a formative stage. And I don't think it's appropriate at this point to make those initial reports public, but the intention of the administration is to make those reports public to you, the Congress, and to the private sector.
But not because they're secret, it's because they're incomplete. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. What we need to make sure is that everybody who has a stake in this in the government has an opportunity to comment on it and then to get it back out to you and the private sector.
Okay, my time is up, and I'm going to ask General Alexander in writing what his view is the goal of the National Guard in cybersecurity for the nation. You know, they play a very interesting role in our states. I've written you several times about it. I'm going to write again to clarify their role. And finally, for the record, to follow up on Senator Collins, the Department of Homeland Security, under your leadership, Secretary, has awarded a $300,000 grant to the Cyber Innovation Center in Louisiana, which is starting a very scalable and proven model to create the cyber warriors of the future. And I look forward to talking with you more about that in conjunction with the chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landrieu. You, as the chair of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, along with Senator Coates, who's your ranking member, I believe, I really would hope you would, through your due diligence in getting ready for the bill, pursue this topic, because we covered a lot of topics today. But we really count on you in the Homeland Security area. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing, and thank all our witnesses for their service to our country. Just to be corrected, if I need to be corrected, I would like to just quickly read my understanding of Section 215. The Section 215 business records provision was created in 2001 in the Patriot Act for tangible things: hotel records, credit card statements, etc. Things that are not phone or email communications. The FBI uses that authority as part of its terrorism investigations. The NSA only uses Section 215 for phone call records, not for Google searches or other things. Under Section 215, NSA collects phone records pursuant to a court record. It can only look at that data after a showing that there is a reasonable, articulable suspicion that a specific individual is involved in terrorism, actually related to Al-Qaeda or to Iran. At that point, the database can be searched, but that search only provides metadata of those phone numbers, of things that are in the phone bill. That person, so the vast majority of records in the database are never accessed and are deleted after a period of 5 years. To look at or use content of a call, a court warrant must be obtained. Is that a fair description, or can you correct it in any way?
That is accurate, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me express my hope once again. You expressed some things to us yesterday in intelligence. I think it's really very important to show the cases where this has been used and has been effective, and do that tomorrow at the classified briefing for all senators. Will you do that?
Senator, we're going to bring those. We'll bring a layout of all those that have happened, and we'll work with the interagency as quickly as possible so that the aggregate numbers can be released by you and others so that the nation knows how much this is really done to protect us and our allies.
Good.
So we'll do both.
That's appreciated. Now, let me go to cyber. As you know, the vice chairman of our committee, Saxby Chambliss, with whom I work closely, we have been sitting down trying to forge a consensus information sharing bill in cyber. Senator Coates, Senator Collins, Senator Mikulski are all members of this committee. And one of the main things is the extent of liability protection, the importance of the domestic portal of entry for cyber attacks. I would like to ask that you describe what is meant by a civilian portal for senators assembled here today, and also the rationale why this is important for privacy and other reasons.
Senator, thanks for that question. The reason from my perspective of a portal through one of the civilian infrastructures is so the nation knows that somebody's not going directly to an intelligence or a military thing with secret information, but rather give it to, for example, DHS, and it can be pushed to FBI and NSA Cyber Command because we all see the data at the same time, and the public will have great confidence that what we're doing is exactly right. Or send it to FBI, depending on the type, and then FBI can shoot it to both of us. So you have a way of doing this. I think that's critical, given the discussion that we have on the other parts, is that the American people know that we are being transparent. We don't look at our cyber infrastructure to know what's going into Wall Street, as an example. And so if there is an attack on Wall Street, I won't see it until afterwards. And so think of that as a missile coming into Wall Street. The people that do see it, like the internet service providers, could tell us that. Could. But there is no guarantee and there's no quick way of doing that. Cyber legislation is needed for that. We need to be able to share that information, and all of us need it because we all will have a role there. Our role would be defend the country. If this is a nation state trying to take down Wall Street, you want us to act. So I think that's the reason for having that civilian portal. That was a longer answer than you probably wanted, but that's why I think all of that is needed.
Thank you. Let me go to another subject quickly, and that's liability protection. And you talked to us a little bit about what the liability protection standard should be in a bill. There are two parts of it. One is for use of a government countermeasure, and the other is voluntary information sharing between two companies. I think many members feel companies won't share unless they have immunity from liability. Could you comment on that?
So the two different aspects, as you stated, and one is how do you share with the government and what action do you take? And so here's where I think my personal thoughts on this are that if the government asks the company to do something to protect the networks or to do something and a mistake is made and it was our fault, then they should have liability protection for that. And they shouldn't stand up and have to be sued. So I think there is a case for that. But if they go company to company or if they're sharing data back and forth as they do today, I'm not sure that the government needs to provide liability insurance that way. So I think there's two different things. Now, this is something that I think the administration, your folks, and we ought to bring everybody together if that's the key point and iron that out. I think we want to get it right. There are subtleties to what we just said. So there are different cases and conditions upon when we would act and how we'd act and what level of liability you would have. And so I think those are the ones that we truly got to get exactly right. From my perspective, we just can't grant everybody gets liability protection. And on the other hand, we don't want to say, do something for the government, and if it goes bad, you're on your own. So I think there's something in the middle there that we have to get right. And from my perspective is when the government's asking them to do something, we ought to have at least part of that liability protection.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all so much for being here. I do have some questions about the situation we're in, but I think what I'd like to do is wait until we get into the classified. I think you've said about as much as you could say in a setting like this. I do think that the senator from Nebraska, though, raised an important consideration that we're probably not talking about enough. I think by any standards, this is a very far-reaching program that really does have tremendous implication to the general public. And having the military, and as he said, you know, your record is exemplary. You're a tremendous American. My dad did 20 years active duty, and I'll do anything I can to help you all in that regard. But I do think that the idea of having military control, we've had those firewalls in the past, and that is a discussion at some point that I think we need to have, and you know, would appreciate, again, at some point, your contribution in that. But I do think that that's very, very important, and like I say, we're not talking about that. In regard to cybersecurity, Secretary McFeely, what are the top countries, and you can chime in on this also, General, what are the top countries that are pinging us? Who's involved in this?
We do have an answer for that. I believe that would be a more appropriate discussion in our classified setting.
So it's not okay to say who's getting after us?
I don't believe in this setting, based on the fact that our information and our assessment is based on our classified work. I don't believe that. I think I would be overstepping a line.
Okay. You mentioned in your testimony the FBI's collaboration with state and local law enforcement. Again, it's hard for them to deal with this. This is, you know, something that they're not most of the time equipped to do. Do you feel that the federal government, specifically the FBI, is doing enough to aid our local, state and local departments when they're faced with a cyber attack?
You mean specific governments, or are we working with state and local law enforcement?
Yes, state and local law enforcement.
So I think the short answer to that is no, but I'm happy to report that we have, I believe, a working plan moving forward. About 2 months ago, we met with various associations representing police and sheriffs and investigators at the state and local side. And through conversation, going through really a discussion of where law enforcement is with the cyber threat, we realized collectively that information is not flowing down to the state and local departments, and even in the instances where it was, they did not have the capability or the level of competence to even address it. We decided that we needed to address that. We have worked a pilot plan out, and it's going to be, the centerpiece of this will be the Internet Crime Complaint Center, where we literally get thousands of complaints in a year from people who've been defrauded over the Internet. Most of the complaints that come in do not meet federal prosecutive guidelines. In other words, it's not something that a United States Attorney's Office would routinely prosecute, and it's not something, and because this is these are fraud-type complaints, either the FBI or Secret Service would routinely investigate. But because state and local's competence level is not at the level where it should be, it's just simply falling off.
What, I couldn't hear your word to Senator Boozman.
Technical
I couldn't hear you. Are you saying confidence or competence?
Competence. Technical capabilities.
That was hard.
So what we've worked out is a pilot project where we are going to package up these types of threats and actually disseminate them direct to the major departments where the victims are located. At the same time, we're going to increase our outreach to state and local law enforcement and give them the tools and the training that they need to get them up to that level of technical competence that they need.
Good, thank you.
Sir, could I add to that, please?
Yes, sir, sure.
So our Secret Service, working with the FBI in a number of cases, as Mr. McFeely indicated in the Joint Task Force, We have a national computer forensics institute in Alabama. We've trained over 1,300 state and local law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges in order to be able to deal with this. What we're dealing with here that is of mostly their competence or the part of not the national security threats, but the criminal fraud threats, is the stealing of credit cards and other personally identifiable information and using that to take money out of banks around the world. You heard about the $46 million that was taken out of 2 banks from the Middle East, including a large amount in this country. That's the kind of training where we can give them the competence and we can work with them, and that's something that we in the FBI are trying to do very much. The outreach that we've had to the various police associations and other things are part of that. But the main thing is to get the training and then to work together. A lot of this happens overseas, and that's where we have to be involved in order to be able to trace those activities overseas, which state and local law enforcement don't really have the ability to do. But it's a joint program and really quite successful.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you all for being here, particularly General Alexander. I want to thank you for coming today. Thank you for your service to our country. And I've been looking at the slides the committee provided, and they're very helpful. We're going to spend over $13 billion in unclassified cyber activities. 7 agencies are involved, excluding the network defense that every agency must do. According to my notes, after the WikiLeaks incident in 2010, a presidential executive order directed agencies to improve classified network security and create a committee to oversee those improvements. So we've had 3 years to improve the control of classified networks and information. Whatever one thinks of Edward Snowden, it looks to me as if we've also got a big problem that is internal, not external. So you tell me that the President has requested $13 billion in cyber spending for FY14, and yet a contractor, not even somebody who's accountable to your chain of command or anyone else in the government, is able to get his hands on a copy of a FISA court order allowing the collection of metadata from Verizon. How on earth does this happen? And why does a contractor have access to information that we're spending $13 billion to prevent outsiders from getting their hands on?
So that's one of the grave concerns we both have, in that in our networks, the system administration of those networks, the IT infrastructure, was outsourced about 14 years ago to move more, to push more of our work out to contractors. As a consequence, many in government, not just us, have system administrators who are contractors working and running our networks. Now, they don't have total visibility of the network, but they get key parts to it. And in this case, this individual was a system administrator with access to key parts of the network. So we've got to address that. That is of serious concern to us and something that we have to fix.
I mean, from your perspective, do you anticipate a recommendation coming forward that this work be done in-house instead of contracting?
Senator, I'm not prepared to make that statement yet. I don't want to react because there are good contractors out there that are doing a good job. I think what we have to do is come back and perhaps look at the oversight mechanism that we have, the checks and balances that are in the system, the automated checks and balances that exist, and what we can do to improve those. As you may know, what the department is going through in the joint information environment would greatly assist in protecting this data. So going to what we call JIE is a huge step in the right direction. I think those cloud security and encrypting data is things that we can and should do, but that's going to take time. I don't want to mislead you. This is a significant effort for the Defense Department to move to, but it's one that I know I've personally talked to the Secretary on and the Chairman. We're pushing this. It is the right way to go. I wish we had it. I wish we'd go back in time. NSA is doing the same.
Financial services. I'm told by folks that I deal with on a banking committee that almost every night somebody's trying to hack their system. Do you have the mechanism by which you can follow up if a bank gave you an IP address that they think that is doing the problem, and if it's not the right question for you, generally, you can ship it any way you want? Or do you not have the mechanism to be able to follow up?
So we do as a team, the team here, almost for suredly, if it's a criminal or other, it would go start with the FBI being in the team. We may have people on the team. If the FBI saw this was a foreign one, they would tip that over to us. So we act as a part. DHS has a key role in that team to see what it is, and we've made great progress in bringing that team together. Bottom line to your answer is someone on this team would take it. Normally, that leadership would probably be, in the cases you described it, FBI with DHS and us.
Just tell
Sir,
me.
on that, we gave out 200,000 IP addresses to individuals within this country, to the banks, excuse me, to block when those distributed denial of services attacks. Some of those were overseas. We also sent them to friendly governments overseas. So as a matter of course, we do this on a regular basis as part of this tripartite team.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If a bank comes to you with an IP address that they believe is trying to hack their system, do you guys follow up on that?
In exactly the same way. The three of us, the three agencies that we represent, go and provide some forensic assistance with respect to that particular incident, and then we provide a larger mitigation message out to the rest of the community so that particular form of attack can't be replicated.
Then do you go back to the bank that's initiated this investigation and tell them what you've done?
We do, and when we put out the information, we don't necessarily indicate which bank was affected. We anonymize that information unless that particular firm wants it public.
Okay, so when a bank comes up to me and says, look, we give them IP addresses and they don't follow up on it, you would classify it as being baloney?
Sir, I can't speak to each and every one of those instances, but what I'm telling you is what the proposal, the way we work as a team in order to try to do that. And if there's a bank that's spoken to you about this, we would be happy to get back to them if they're prepared for you to tell me about that.
I don't know that they are, but maybe they are. I can't say, but there's actually it's multiple banks have talked to me about that. So I just want to say thank you very much. I will tell you that there's been a lot of, if I might editorialize just for a second, Madam Chair, there's been a lot of concern about what's happened in the last couple of weeks. And I don't serve on the Intel Committee. I do serve on Homeland Security, but I don't serve on Intel. And I will tell you that I think it's positive for this country to be having the discussion we're having. And there may be some negatives involved here, but I think it's positive to have the discussion so that we're thinking about civil liberties and we're thinking about freedom as it revolves to our national security. And you guys all have a tough job, but we will get through this, and hopefully we'll secure both our security and our freedoms when this is done. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much for having this hearing. Is Baloney a Montana firm, a name or number?
I was being very nice. I was going to refer to cow excrement here, but
we were lucky. Again, thank you so much for having this hearing. Let me just start by saying that I think our nation's most important cybersecurity resource is its cyber workforce. Without the right people using it, even the most sophisticated technology is really only of limited use. That's why I think it's important that we successfully identify, recruit, and train cyber workforce to form the foundation of any of our national cybersecurity plan. DHS and NSA's Centers of Academic Excellence are really important tools in this effort. In my state, Washington State, hosts a number of these Centers of Excellence. We have the Information Assurance Education Centers at the UW-Tacoma and UW-Bothell. We have the Information Assurance Research Center at the UW-Seattle and the Information Assurance Two-Year Education Center at Whatcom Community College. And together, those programs really offer cybersecurity education and training at the two-year undergraduate, master's, and PhD level. Secretary Beers and General Alexander, if you could comment on how you think these Centers of Excellence play into your respective cyber hiring pipelines and workforce development programs, I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Let me go first on that. We absolutely are dependent upon that form of education as a way to get qualified individuals into our workforce. We at DHS have an outreach program to community college generally, but also to these centers of excellence, as well as to universities. The only comment that I would make is we don't have enough people around the country trained to do all the jobs that we in government and the private sector need to have done. And I think that's really one of the educational frontiers for this country, is to create that kind of a workforce for all of us. So that's certainly something that we support very much at DHS.
General, you want to comment?
Senator, thank you for that question, because that is a huge program that we do with over 140 different schools collectively between DHS, NSA, and the curriculums that we set up there with those schools. This is not just you get a thing and you go do it. They actually set up a curriculum that helps ensure that the students that are going through that will have the background we need in information assurance, and now in cyber operations, a new one. So there's double credentials that they can get, and I just encourage your schools. I know everybody's looking at that, and we're getting tremendous pressure. These are very difficult to get into. This is not something that we just grant. It's interesting because we got a number of schools to bring this forward. Some of them do not meet the qualifications and don't get that accreditation. So they work through that. We work with them. We have a great outreach. I think this is great for our country to build these kinds of people for both the military and civilian.
We absolutely have to have that workforce. I agree. Well, I know that a coherent national cybersecurity strategy really requires some cooperation. You've got to have collaboration between government, private industry, and academia. And as we saw with the development of the information economy and the internet, clustering these universities and companies and the appropriate government agencies together offer some really great benefits. Within the cybersecurity industry, the South Puget Sound in my state, that region has sort of emerged as a leading cyber cluster, if you will. The unique and nationally recognized resources that region has to offer have really created a great environment for cybersecurity to really flourish. They have some really great stakeholders. They've got the Center for Information Assurance and Cybersecurity at the University of Washington. We have great influential technology and defense companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing, and we have 2 military installations, Joint Base Lewis McChord and Washington National Guard Camp Murray right there. And I have really seen personally how those relationships have really benefited that region. And Secretary Gallagher, I would love it if you could talk about the importance of these so-called cyber clusters, like the one we have in my state, and what steps NIST and Commerce are taking to really promote those.
So the notion of clusters as a way of sort of creating this amplification effect that you talk about is broader even than just cybersecurity. In fact, it's a key part of our strategy in other areas like advanced manufacturing. And what tends to happen is you get sort of a critical mass where you have enough expertise that it creates an attracting and pooling, and that talent base really starts to create wins. So you attract the right kinds of companies and government agencies and academic programs. I think it has to be a key part of the cybersecurity education effort as well, because in the end you're talking about workforce development, and so you're going to have to bring together. It's one of the reasons the public-private partnerships are going to be such a key element here. We're seeing some of that already. Senator Mikulski provided a program funded through NIST, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which leverages Maryland and Virginia, which have also been looking at this sort of effect to bring in companies to work collaboratively on cybersecurity and create this tipping in effect that you so eloquently described that are part of clusters.
Great. Well, I'm a big proponent of that. I am out of time, but I did want to submit a question about the National Guard. I think as we move forward, we're going to have to make sure that we are coordinating with them. They're going to be kind of our boots on the ground if there's ever an issue, and I'm hoping that we're doing the right things there. So, Madam Chairman, I'd like to just submit that question.
Thank you very much, Senator, and we hope that through the respective subcommittees, there'll be follow-ups that will go even deeper to this. And in terms of your clustering, we in Maryland feel we're at the epicenter of cybersecurity because we have the National Security headquartered there. We have the National Institutes of Standards headquartered there. We hope to have the FBI headquartered there. We have the University of Maryland.
Okay, well, we'll take
Johns
the west
Hopkins.
side of the country.
but thank you very much. I think, Senator Shelby, did you want to say something, sir?
I just have one last observation. I just want to thank the panel, all of you, for your service to the country, the way you've conducted yourself before you got here today, and what you've done here for the day for American. And I think it has to be said. We worked together a long time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well said, Senator Shelby. If there are no further questions this afternoon, senators may submit additional questions for the committee's official record, and we request the witness's response within 30 days. As previously announced, and as part of our practice on security issues, we will now move to a closed briefing. Before we do, I would like to make some general closing comments. First of all, I really do want to thank the witnesses for participating. The hearing hasn't been quite the way we originally thought, but it was a good hearing. People do have a right to know. People have a right to say their voices. That's why we responded. But I think the big national debate that started after 9/11 is the inherent tension between security and privacy. It is time now for a new, fresh national debate. It's beginning in the usual committee structure. The second thing is that many of us are concerned about what is the access to people and businesses' information. Now, there are those, because of the Snowden revelation, wonder about government's access to that information, whether it's through the NSA, whether it's through the IRS, or whatever. People are asking, what is the government doing? The purpose of this hearing, however, is who is rating the information that we have. So maybe people are concerned about what is NSA doing, but I'm concerned about the people every single day that are trying to get access to somebody's Social Security number, their Medicare number, their checking account number, their smartphone information, so they can either steal from them or lead to other access to their bank account, to their other kinds of assets. So we're worried about that. I'm concerned every day about the number of people out there trying to, with the great intellectual entrepreneurship of our country, that are coming up with new ideas and new products to create the new jobs for the 21st century. And they're being stolen in the greatest cyber espionage heist. So why find a cure for cancer if you can try to steal it from FDA or the Patent Office? I'm worried about that. And then I worry about things like the grid. And I worry about access to those who are trying to raid the grid. Tonight, there's a gathering storm. We fear a derecho, another derecho, maybe hitting the Maryland-Washington area. We know how when the grid is shut down, it is a terrible consequence in terms of our society. I don't want ever to be a grid shut down here in the greater capital region or anywhere in the United States. So the purpose of this hearing was to go after those who have predatory intent, predatory, premeditated intent against either an individual, our business, or our critical infrastructure. There are those who are also concerned about, is government now passing beyond a red line on civil liberties? I think we ought to have that debate. I think we ought to have that discussion. It could be the subject of another hearing here. There will be the Feinstein hearing. There'll be the Judiciary Committee hearing, and I'm sure. But you know what? This is America. This is America, and people have a right to know. They have a right to have their public officials to explain this. So I think it's been a great hearing. So therefore, though, this committee will now stand in recess after the closed briefing until the morning of Thursday, June 20th, where we will vote on our spending allocations and also take up the very important legislation of Veterans Affairs and our agricultural appropriations. This committee now stands in recess.